Do you even have a degree, or just opinions? The question hadn't been asked yet, but somehow, the room already felt like it was waiting for it. Claire Bennett moved quietly between the glass table and the far wall, placing a porcelain cup beside each leather chair with the kind of precision that didn't draw attention, but somehow demanded it. Outside, rain traced slow lines down the windows, blurring the skyline of Manhattan into something softer, almost distant, like the city itself had stepped back to watch what was about to happen. Inside, the boardroom was anything but soft. 12 people, 12 voices, all speaking in numbers that could move markets, decide futures, rewrite entire industries. $2 billion. That was the number hanging in the air, unspoken but heavy, like pressure before a storm. At the head of the table sat Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Capital, a man who had built his reputation on seeing what others missed, and more importantly, exposing it. His cufflinks caught the light as he adjusted his sleeve, eyes scanning the projection screen, where graphs climbed confidently upward. "We close this by Friday," one board member said, tapping the table lightly, "or we lose leverage." Another voice followed. "The model holds. Risk is minimal." Minimal. Claire paused for half a second as she set down the last cup, just a fraction too long for someone trained to disappear. Her eyes flicked to the screen. A number. Small. Buried. But wrong. She didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she stepped back, hands folding gently in front of her, posture relaxed, almost invisible again. Almost. Daniel noticed. He didn't turn his head, but something in his expression shifted. A microsecond. A flicker. He had built an empire on reading rooms, and right now, something didn't align. "Run the projection again," he said calmly. The analyst hesitated, then clicked. Slides moved. Numbers recalculated. Still wrong. Claire exhaled slowly, barely noticeable, but enough. Daniel's gaze lifted, finally landing on her. Not her uniform. Not the tray. Her. "You," he said, voice even controlled. The room followed his eyes, curiosity replacing certainty. Claire didn't move. "Did you just react to something?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation. Not yet. Just a test. The kind he was known for. Claire tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether the moment was worth stepping into. The room waited. Rain tapped softly against the glass. "It's nothing, sir," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm for someone in her position. A few faint smiles appeared around the table. That familiar dismissal. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her now, not as background, but as a variable. "Nothing," he repeated. Then, a pause. Deliberate. Precise. The kind that made people fill silence with mistakes. "Funny," he added quietly. "Because in this room, nothing usually costs a lot more than something." A ripple of restrained laughter followed. Controlled. Polished. Claire didn't join it. Her eyes returned to the screen, steady, unshaken. And in that moment, something shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Because for the first time since she had entered the room, she wasn't invisible anymore. Claire held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than most people would dare. Then she looked back at the screen, not at him, not at the others, just the numbers, as if the room had already faded away and only the logic remained. The analyst cleared his throat, slightly uncomfortable now, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The projections are based on last quarter's adjusted growth curve," he said, more to defend himself than to inform. Claire tilted her head a fraction, her voice still calm when she spoke. "The growth curve is fine," she said softly, "but the compounding interval is off." The room stilled. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Daniel did not interrupt. He watched. That was his advantage. He let people reveal themselves. "What do you mean?" the analyst asked, a hint of sharpness creeping into his tone. Claire stepped forward, just one step, careful, measured, as if she understood that crossing that invisible line required more than confidence. It required precision. "You are compounding quarterly," she said, eyes still on the screen, "but the model assumes monthly reinvestment in the underlying assets. That difference alone inflates your return by about 3.8% annually." Silence followed. Not disbelief. Calculation. Several heads turned back to the screen. Someone reached for a tablet. Another flipped through printed sheets. Daniel's fingers tapped once against the table, slow, deliberate. 3.8, he repeated. Claire nodded slightly. Approximately, she said. It depends on how aggressively you model reinvestment timing, but it will not be lower than 3. The analyst frowned, quickly typing, adjusting inputs, rerunning the model. The numbers shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. A small drop. A subtle correction. A few $1,000,000 over time becoming tens of millions. The kind of error that did not scream, but quietly rewrote outcomes. A low murmur spread across the table. Not laughter this time. Something else. Awareness. Daniel leaned forward now, elbows resting lightly on the polished surface. And you saw that from there? He asked. Claire did not answer immediately. She glanced at the reflection in the glass table, then back to the screen. It was in the timing assumptions, she said simply. They did not match the reinvestment logic. No pride. No hesitation. Just fact. One of the senior board members, an older man with silver hair and a reputation for remembering everything, narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked at Claire longer than the others did. Not at her uniform. Not at her hands. At her. As if searching for something just out of reach. Daniel noticed that too. He always noticed who noticed. The analyst leaned back, exhaling slowly, the earlier confidence gone, replaced by something quieter. She is right, he admitted. The words landed heavier than expected. Claire stepped back again, returning to where she had been, hands folded, posture neutral, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The room no longer saw her as background. They saw a variable they had not accounted for. And Daniel Whitmore, for the first time since the meeting began, allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not because she had spoken, but because she had chosen the exact moment to do it. The rain outside grew steadier, each drop tracing the glass like a quiet countdown, and inside the boardroom, no one reached for their coffee anymore. Claire remained where she had stepped back, her presence now impossible to ignore, even in stillness. Daniel Whitmore studied her without hiding it this time, his expression no longer casual, no longer dismissive, but sharpened by interest. He had seen analysts freeze under less pressure, seen executives crumble when challenged in front of their peers, yet this woman in a simple uniform had not raised her voice, had not defended herself, had simply corrected the room. That was not confidence. That was control. What is your name? He asked, the question cutting clean through the low murmurs. Claire looked at him, calm as before. Claire, she said. No last name. Not yet. A few people exchanged glances. That, too, was noticed. Daniel leaned back slightly, fingers steepled now, a subtle shift into something more deliberate. Claire, he repeated, as if testing how it sounded in the room, then added, tell me something. He paused just long enough for attention to lock in. If the compounding interval was wrong, what else did we miss? The question landed heavier than the first. This was no longer curiosity. This was pressure, the kind that exposed people. Claire did not answer immediately. Her eyes returned to the screen, scanning, not searching, as if she already knew where to look. The room held its breath without realizing it. The exit multiple, she said after a moment. A few heads lifted. It assumes market stability over 36 months, she continued, her voice even, measured. But your own volatility index in slide 12 contradicts that assumption. Someone flipped quickly to the slide. The numbers were there. Quiet. Unquestioned. Until now. If volatility spikes even by 10%, Claire added, your projected valuation compresses and the margin you are relying on disappears. Silence again. Not empty. Dense. Calculating. The older board member leaned forward, eyes narrowing with recognition that had not fully formed yet. Daniel did not move. And your confidence level? He asked. Claire met his gaze directly this time. High, she said. No hesitation. No qualifiers. Just one word. The analyst shifted in his seat, scrolling through data, his earlier authority now replaced by something closer to unease. We modeled conservative scenarios, he said, but his voice lacked the certainty it had before. Claire did not challenge him. She did not need to. The numbers were already speaking. Daniel's eyes flicked briefly to the others around the table, reading their reactions, measuring the shift. It was happening. Subtle. Irreversible. Respect, not given, but forming. Then he looked back at Claire, and this time, there was no trace of amusement left. Only focus. Interesting, he said quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. Deliberate. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, The question finally came, sharper now, unmistakable in its intent. Do you even have a degree? Or are you just very good at listening? A few restrained smiles returned, weaker than before, uncertain. The room waited again. But this time, it was different. Because now, they were not waiting to dismiss her. They were waiting to see how far she would go. Claire did not answer right away. The question hung in the air, sharper than before, not loud, but deliberate, designed to place her exactly where she was supposed to be. Beneath him, beneath all of them. A test, not of knowledge, but of position. A few eyes shifted toward her, some curious, some quietly amused, waiting for the expected reaction. An apology, a retreat, something small. Claire remained still. Her hands did not tighten. Her posture did not change. Only her gaze lifted slightly, meeting Daniel's without resistance, without challenge, just clarity. Yes, she said. One word. Calm. Complete. No elaboration. The room waited for more. It did not come. Daniel's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He had asked that question countless times in different forms. Watch people rush to justify themselves, list credentials, defend their worth. She did none of that. Where? He asked, his tone still even, but now more focused than before. Claire glanced briefly at the screen, then back to him, as if deciding whether the answer mattered. It would not change the numbers, she said quietly. A faint ripple moved through the room. Not laughter this time. Something closer to surprise. One of the board members shifted in his chair, leaning slightly forward. Daniel did not smile. Not yet. No, he agreed. But it might change how seriously we take you. The words were clean. Precise. Not cruel. But not kind either. Claire nodded once, as if accepting the logic without accepting the premise. Then you should not take me seriously, she said. Another pause. Longer. He studied her more closely now, searching for the edge, the hesitation, the moment where confidence would give way to something else. It did not come. The older board member, the one who had been watching her longer than the others, finally spoke, his voice slower, measured with age and memory. Claire, he said, almost testing the name himself. Have we met before? Claire turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged, but something softer passed through her eyes. Recognition. Brief. Controlled. I do not think so, sir, she replied. The man did not look convinced. He leaned back, but his gaze did not leave her. Daniel noticed that too. He always noticed patterns. You corrected 2 structural errors in under a minute, Daniel said, returning the focus. And you did it without notes, without access, and without hesitation. He paused, letting the weight of that settle across the table. People do not usually pick that up by accident. Claire said nothing. The rain tapped louder now, steady against the glass, filling the silence that followed. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering, not for secrecy, but for precision. So I will ask you again, he said, not as a joke. His eyes locked on hers. No distraction, no room to deflect. Where did you learn to see like that? This time, the room did not smile. No one shifted. No one whispered. Because now, they were no longer watching a waitress answer a question. They were watching a variable become something else entirely. And for the first time since the meeting began, the balance in the room was no longer one-sided. Claire did not look away when he asked the second time. The room had shifted, but not in a way that made her larger, only in a way that made everything else quieter. She considered the question, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was deciding how much of it belonged here. By listening, she said finally. A few brows furrowed. It sounded too simple, too incomplete. Daniel did not react, but his attention did not waver. Listening to what? He pressed. Claire glanced at the screen again, then at the table, at the reflections of numbers and faces overlapping in the polished surface. To what people assume is correct, she said, and then asking why it is not. The older board member's expression changed slightly, something closer to recognition now, but still just out of reach. Daniel leaned back again, slower this time, absorbing the answer. It was not technical. It was not defensive. It was not what most people would say. That made it more valuable. That is not taught in most classrooms, he said. Claire gave the smallest hint of a nod. No, she agreed. Silence followed, but it was no longer uncertain. It was focused. Every person at the table was recalibrating, adjusting how they saw her, how they understood the last few minutes. The analyst, who had been quiet since confirming her correction, spoke again, more carefully now. If the volatility assumption is wrong, he said, what would you change? It was not a challenge. It was a question. A real one. Claire shifted her weight slightly, not stepping forward this time, not needing to. I would not change the model first, she said. I would change the timing. Several heads turned. Explain, Daniel said, his voice lower now, less performative, more direct. Claire met his eyes, steady. You are trying to force certainty into an uncertain window, she said. If you stagger entry points over 12 to 18 months instead of committing up front, you reduce exposure without sacrificing upside. She paused, just long enough for the logic to settle. You are not removing risk, she added. You are controlling when you take it. The words landed differently than before. Not corrective. Strategic. One of the board members reached for a pen, jotting something down. Another nodded slowly, almost to himself. The older man exhaled, a quiet sound, then leaned forward again, his gaze fixed on Claire with a clarity that had finally arrived. Bennett, he said, the name coming out with certainty now. The room stilled again. Claire did not react immediately, just a brief stillness. Then her eyes met his. No denial, no surprise, just acknowledgement. Yes, he continued, his voice steadier now. Claire Bennett. He turned slightly toward Daniel. She was not just on Wall Street. She was behind the Halcyon restructuring 3 years ago. A ripple moved through the room, sharper this time. Recognition spreading in real time. Daniel's gaze did not leave Claire. Halcyon, he repeated quietly. That deal had been studied, dissected, praised for its precision under pressure. And then, just as suddenly, the name behind it had disappeared. He leaned forward, slower now, as if the weight of the moment required it. You walked away from that, he said. Not a question. Claire's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened, just for a moment. I stepped away, she said. Not defensive, not proud, just true. The rain outside continued, steady, indifferent to the shift inside the room. Because now, the question was no longer whether she had a degree. The question was why someone like her had chosen to stand here instead of anywhere else. And for the first time, Daniel Whitmore was no longer testing her. He was trying to understand her. No one spoke for a moment after the names settled into the room. Halcyon was not just a deal. It was a case study, a benchmark, something people referenced when they wanted to prove that precision could still outperform instinct. And now the person behind it stood in front of them, holding nothing but a tray minutes ago. Daniel Whitmore's gaze did not shift, but something in his posture did, almost imperceptibly, as if the room itself had adjusted around her. You stepped away, he repeated, quieter now, less like a statement and more like a question he had not finished asking. Claire gave a small nod, her hands still resting lightly in front of her, unchanged, steady. Yes. No explanation followed. That, more than anything, unsettled the room. People in positions like hers did not simply leave. Not without a story. Not without a reason that justified the loss. One of the board members, younger, sharper, leaned forward slightly, curiosity overtaking caution. You disappeared, he said, right after Halcyon closed. No transition, no announcement. Claire did not look at him. Her attention remained on Daniel, as if the rest of the room had become background noise again. Sometimes, she said quietly, the work is finished before people realize it is done. The answer did not clarify. It reframed. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. He had spent years studying people who built things, people who chased recognition, people who needed the outcome to validate the effort. She did not fit any of those patterns. And now you are here, he said. Not a judgment. Not yet. Claire's gaze moved briefly across the table, then back to him. For now, she replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Temporary. Intentional. Chosen. The older board member leaned back slowly, as if the final piece had settled into place. She was known for walking into broken structures and leaving them cleaner than anyone thought possible, he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for the room. And then she would leave before anyone could claim her work. A quiet shift moved through the group again, not surprised this time, but understanding. Not complete, but enough. Daniel's fingers tapped once against the table, then stilled. If that is true, he said, then you are not here by accident. Claire did not respond immediately. The rain outside softened slightly, the rhythm changing, like the storm itself had reached a different phase. "No," she said after a moment. The word landed clearly. Daniel held her gaze, then nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. "Then why this room?" he asked. "Why now?" Claire looked at the screen again, at the adjusted numbers, at the model that had already begun to shift because of her presence. Then she looked back at him. "Because you were about to approve it," she said. No accusation, no emotion, just fact. A few people shifted in their seats. The weight of that statement was not loud, but it was precise. Daniel did not look away. "And if we had," he asked. Claire's expression remained calm. "Then you would have spent the next 18 months explaining why the outcome did not match the confidence." The room fell still again. Not out of tension, out of recognition. Daniel exhaled slowly, a quiet breath that did not signal defeat, but clarity. He leaned back, studying her one more time, not as a waitress, not as an interruption, but as something far more difficult to categorize. "You could have said nothing," he said. Claire gave the smallest hint of a smile. Not visible to most, but enough. "Yes," she said, and that was exactly why she had not. The room did not return to normal after that. It could not. Something invisible had shifted, and once seen, it could not be unseen. The numbers on the screen were the same, yet no one looked at them the same way. Daniel Whitmore remained still for a moment longer, then slowly straightened in his chair, the movement subtle but decisive, like a line being redrawn. "Then we paused the approval," he said. No hesitation, no discussion, just a decision. A few heads turned, not in disagreement, but in recalibration. That was the difference between authority and noise. When he spoke, things moved. The analyst nodded quickly, already adjusting his notes, his earlier certainty replaced with careful attention. One of the board members closed his folder, exhaling softly, as if a tension he had not noticed before had just been released. Claire did not react. She did not look relieved. She did not look proud. She simply stood there, as she had before, as if the outcome had never been the point. Daniel noticed that too. "Stay," he said, not as a command, but as a request that carried weight. Claire did not move immediately. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the door, then back to him. A quiet calculation. "For a moment," she replied. Daniel gave a slight nod, accepting the condition without question. The older board member leaned forward again, resting his hands lightly on the table. "You saw the flaw before anyone else," he said, his tone no longer probing, but respectful. "What would you do next?" It was not a test anymore. It was an invitation. Claire stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, but still without urgency. She moved to the side of the screen, not taking control of the room, but aligning with it. "I would not fix this here," she said. A few brows lifted. "This room is designed for decisions," she continued, "not for rebuilding assumptions." Daniel's gaze sharpened slightly. "So where?" he asked. Claire glanced at the reflection of the city behind the glass, then back at the table. "Somewhere smaller," she said, "where people are allowed to be wrong before they are expected to be right." The words settled differently than anything she had said before. Not technical, structural, cultural. One of the younger members shifted, as if recognizing something uncomfortably true. Daniel tapped the table once, thoughtful. "And you would lead that?" he asked. Claire met his eyes, steady, unshaken. "No," she said. A pause. Then, quietly, "I would help someone else see it." The answer lingered. It did not elevate her. It did not diminish her. It revealed her. The older board member smiled faintly, almost to himself. "That sounds exactly like you," he murmured. Daniel leaned back again, studying her with a different kind of focus now, not as a variable, not as a disruption, but as something rare. "You do not seem interested in the credit," he said. Claire's gaze softened just slightly, the smallest shift, almost unnoticeable. "Credit does not fix outcomes," she replied. The room fell quiet again, but not with tension, with clarity, because now, for the first time, they understood the difference between someone who wanted to be right and someone who wanted things to be right. And in that difference, everything changed. No one reached for their notes anymore. The conversation had moved beyond the slides, beyond the projections, into something less comfortable and far more important. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, but his attention had shifted completely, no longer divided across the room, no longer scanning for errors, but focused entirely on the woman standing. a few feet away from the screen. You help, he said slowly, as if testing the word itself. But you do not lead. You see the flaws, but you do not stay to own the fix. It was not criticism. It was observation. Claire did not flinch. Ownership is not always about staying, she replied. Sometimes it is about knowing when your presence stops being useful. A few people exchanged glances again, quieter this time, more thoughtful. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his voice lowering, not for effect, but for precision. And right now, he asked, is your presence useful here? Claire looked at the screen one last time, at the adjusted numbers, at the conversation that had already begun to reshape itself around a single correction. Then she looked at him. For a moment, she said again. The repetition was intentional, limited, measured. The older board member smiled faintly, almost amused now, as if he had seen this pattern before and recognized where it would end. Daniel followed the same line of thought, but his expression did not soften. It sharpened. Then let me be direct, he said. The room stilled again, not out of tension, but out of expectation. Join us, he added. The words landed simply. No build-up. No theatrics. Just an offer that most people in that room would not hesitate to accept. Claire did not respond immediately. She did not look surprised. That, more than anything, caught attention. Because for everyone else, this would have been the moment. The pivot. The reward. She considered it, not emotionally, but structurally, as if the question itself required analysis. No, she said. Softly. Clearly. A few heads turned. Not shocked, but caught. Daniel did not react outwardly, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, not in offense, but in curiosity that had deepened rather than diminished. No, he repeated. Claire gave a small nod. You do not need me here, she said. You need to fix how you decide what matters. The words were not confrontational. They were precise. The difference was unmistakable. A younger board member shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now, not because of her tone, but because of the truth behind it. Daniel remained still, absorbing the statement without interruption. He had built his career on identifying blind spots in markets, in strategies, in people. Rarely had someone pointed one directly back at him. And you believe we cannot do that without you? He asked. Claire's gaze held steady. I believe you will not do it because of me, she said. You will do it because you saw it. The room went quiet again, but this time it was not about her. It was about them, about what they had missed, about how close they had come to approving something that now felt incomplete. Daniel leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then something shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but something closer to respect. You are not interested in the position, he said. Claire shook her head gently. I am interested in the outcome, she replied. The rain outside had softened to a light drizzle now, the city coming back into focus beyond the glass. Daniel followed her gaze for a brief second, then returned his attention to her. Then answer me one more thing, he said. Why stay long enough to say any of this? Claire looked at him, her expression calm, almost distant now, as if the answer had been decided long before this room existed. Because you asked, she said. And in that moment, it was no longer a conversation about opportunity. It was a conversation about standards. No one spoke after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because anything added would have felt smaller than what had already been understood. Daniel Whitmore held her gaze for a moment longer, then slowly nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. It was the kind of nod that did not end a conversation, but closed a chapter of it. Fair enough, he said quietly. The words were simple, but the tone had changed. No edge, no test, just respect, earned without being requested. Claire did not respond. She did not need to. The room had already shifted around her in a way that made any further explanation unnecessary. She turned slightly, her movement unhurried, as if she had always intended to leave at this exact moment. The tray still rested near the edge of the table, untouched since she had set it down. She picked it up with the same steady hands, the same quiet precision. No one mistook the gesture for a return to where she had been. It was simply part of how she moved through the world. The older board member watched her carefully, then gave a faint smile, almost private, as if confirming something he had suspected long before the others caught up. We almost approved it, the younger member said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Daniel heard it. He always heard everything. But we did not, he replied, just as quietly. Not defensive, not proud, just clear. Claire paused briefly near the door, not turning back, not waiting for permission, just still for a fraction of a second, as if allowing the moment to settle fully behind her. The rain had nearly stopped now, the glass no longer blurred, the city beyond sharp again, defined, like the room itself had been reset. Daniel's voice came once more, not loud, not commanding, but certain. Claire. She turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. If you ever decide to stay longer than a moment, he said, this room will be different because of you. It was not an offer this time. It was a statement. Claire considered it, just for a second, then gave the smallest nod. Not acceptance, not refusal, just understanding. Then make it different anyway, she said. No emphasis, no challenge, just a quiet standard, placed where it could not be ignored. She opened the door and stepped out, the soft click behind her marking the end of something that had not been planned, but would not be forgotten. The room remained still for a moment longer, then slowly, almost naturally, people began to move again, but not the way they had before. Laptops opened with more care. Notes were rewritten, not just updated. Questions formed that had not been asked earlier. Daniel remained seated, his eyes on the screen, but seeing something else entirely. Not the numbers, not the model. The gap between what had been assumed and what had been true. He exhaled once, slow, measured, then looked around the table. We rebuild it, he said. No hesitation. No shortcut. The decision was different now, because the room was different. And somewhere beyond the glass, beyond the city, beyond the moment that had already passed, the quiet standard she left behind remained. Not loud, not visible, but undeniable, because she did not raise her voice. She raised the level at which everything else had to operate.